The champagne flute trembled in my grip as I stared at the mortgage documents spread across Brianna's marble kitchen counter. My name, Natalie Winters, was printed in bold black letters under primary lender on what was supposedly my brother's dream home. The irony burned deeper than the expensive champagne sliding down my throat. 20 minutes earlier, I'd been celebrating Marcus and Brianna's housewarming party, admiring their stunning new colonial in the hills of West Lynn, congratulating them on their picture-perfect life. Now I understood exactly how they'd afforded it all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My hands moved to smooth down my emerald dress, a nervous habit I'd developed during board meetings when the stakes were high. But this wasn't a boardroom, this was family, this was supposed to be sacred. The voices from the living room drifted through the kitchen, friends and relatives praising Marcus for his success, marveling at how a car dealership manager could afford such luxury. If only they knew the truth. If only they knew that their golden boy had been living off his sister's credit for months, building his fantasy on my foundation without asking, without acknowledging, without even having the decency to tell me. The credit card statements flashed through my memory like a slideshow of betrayal. Maui resort charges, first-class flights, designer luggage, couples spa treatments, all billed to the American Express card I'd given him 2 years ago during his divorce, a temporary lifeline that was supposed to help him get back on his feet. Instead, he'd used it to finance a honeymoon that cost more than most people's annual salary, then somehow leveraged that spending history and my excellent credit to secure this mortgage. I am Natalie Winters. I'm 34 years old, and I've spent the last decade building Cascade digital marketing from a one-woman operation in my studio apartment to Portland's premier real estate marketing agency. Our client roster includes every major developer and luxury realtor from Seattle to Sacramento. I own properties across 3 states, maintain a pristine credit score, and have never missed a payment on anything in my adult life. This is the story of how I discovered that the person I trusted most had been stealing from me for months, and how I used that betrayal to teach him the most expensive lesson about family loyalty he'd ever receive. The discovery started innocuously enough, the way most life-changing moments do. I'd been in back-to-back client meetings all morning, helping Pinnacle Development launch their new waterfront project, when my phone buzzed with a fraud alert from Chase Bank. Unusual spending patterns detected, large purchases in Hawaii. My first instinct was confusion. I hadn't been to Hawaii since college. My second was panic. Someone had clearly cloned my card or hacked my accounts. I excused myself from the conference room where Carmen Rodriguez, my business partner and closest friend, was presenting our social media strategy to a group of investors. Carmen had worked alongside me since the beginning, watching me bootstrap this company through sheer determination and an unhealthy relationship with coffee. She knew my spending habits better than anyone, knew I was more likely to splurge on marketing software than tropical vacations. In the privacy of my corner office overlooking the Willamette River, I called Chase's fraud department. The representative, a woman named Kelly with a kind voice and thorough approach, walked me through the charges. The Royal Hawaiian Hotel, Mama's Fish House in Maui, helicopter tours, luxury car rentals. Each charge sent another spike of adrenaline through my system until Kelly mentioned something that made my blood freeze. The card number matched my American Express account perfectly, but these weren't fraudulent charges in the traditional sense. They were authorized purchases made by Marcus Winters, my brother, whose name I'd added as an authorized user during his messy divorce 2 years prior. At the time, Marcus had been drowning in legal fees and couldn't qualify for his own credit. I'd given him the card temporarily, telling him to use it only for necessities while he got back on his feet. Groceries, gas, maybe the occasional dinner out to maintain some dignity during the worst period of his life. I'd forgotten about the card entirely. In my mind, it had served its purpose when Marcus started dating Brianna 8 months ago and seemed to be rebuilding his life. He'd gotten promoted to senior sales manager at Premier Auto Group, started dressing better, talking about the future with optimism I hadn't heard since before his first marriage imploded. I'd assumed he'd stopped using the card and simply forgotten to return it. The monthly statements showed such small charges that I'd set up automatic payments without reviewing the details. That assumption had just cost me $27,000. Kelly confirmed that all charges were legitimate, made with the physical card by someone who knew the PIN. The spending pattern showed a clear escalation over the past 6 months. Small purchases initially, gas stations and grocery stores, then gradually larger amounts. restaurant bills, clothing stores. The Hawaii trip represented the largest spike, but it wasn't the end. There were charges from the past 2 weeks. Furniture stores, home improvement centers, wedding vendors. My brother had used my credit to finance his entire relationship. I hung up with Kelly and immediately called Marcus. The phone rang twice before going to voicemail. His voice, cheerful and confident, invited me to leave a message and promised he'd get back to me soon. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I called his workplace, Premier Auto Group, where the receptionist informed me that Marcus was taking a personal day to prepare for his housewarming party. The housewarming party. Tonight. The event I'd already RSVP'd for, had bought a gift for, had been looking forward to as a celebration of my little brother's success. The irony tasted bitter on my tongue. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of controlled fury, mechanically completing my work while my mind raced through possibilities. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe Marcus had intended to pay me back and simply forgotten to mention the charges. Maybe the Hawaii trip was a misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity or technical error. But even as I tried to rationalize his behavior, I knew better. I'd built a business on reading people, on understanding motivations and identifying deception. The pattern was too clear, too deliberate. Marcus hadn't made a mistake. He'd made a choice. Multiple choices over months of time, to take what wasn't his and build a life on borrowed money. Carmen knocked on my office door around 4 o'clock, concern evident in her expression. She'd known me long enough to recognize when something was wrong, even when I was trying to hide it. "You've been staring at your computer screen for 20 minutes without typing," she observed, settling into the chair across from my desk. "What's going on?" I told her everything. About the credit card, the charges, the growing realization that Marcus had been systematically stealing from me to fund his new life with Brianna. Carmen listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. "That's not borrowing," she said when I finished. "That's theft. Family or not, he's committed fraud." "It's more complicated than that," I replied, though I knew she was right. "He's my brother. I gave him access to the account. For emergencies. For necessities. Not for financing a luxury honeymoon and whatever else he's been buying." Carmen leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Natalie, you can't enable this behavior. If he'll steal from you, and he'll steal from anyone." The truth of her words hit harder than I wanted to admit. This wasn't the first time Marcus had disappointed me, though it was certainly the most expensive. Growing up, he'd been the charming one, the smooth talker who could get out of any situation with a smile and a story. I'd been the responsible one, the planner, the person who cleaned up messes and made sure bills got paid. Our parents, Robert and Linda, had always made excuses for Marcus while expecting perfection from me. The pattern was repeating itself, but this time the stakes were higher. This time his choices had real financial consequences that went beyond childhood disappointments. I made a decision. "Cancel all my evening appointments," I told Carmen. "I'm going to that housewarming party." "Are you sure that's wise?" "You're angry. Maybe you should cool off first. Call him tomorrow." "No, if Marcus wants to celebrate his success, he can do it with everyone knowing exactly how that success was achieved." Carmen studied my face, recognizing the expression I wore during difficult negotiations. "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to get my money back, and I'm planning to make sure this never happens again." I left the office early and drove to my condo in South Waterfront, using the time to think strategically about my approach. Confronting Marcus publicly would be satisfying but potentially counterproductive. I needed information first. I needed to understand the full scope of his deception before deciding how to handle it. My condo offered a stunning view of the Willamette River and Portland's skyline, a reminder of how far I'd come from the modest duplex where Marcus and I had grown up. I'd worked for everything I owned, built my success through careful planning and relentless effort. The contrast with Marcus's approach couldn't have been starker. I changed into the emerald dress I'd bought for the party, applied makeup carefully, and practiced the smile I'd need to wear while gathering information. Tonight, I would play the supportive sister while documenting every detail of Marcus's fraud. Tomorrow, I would decide what to do about it. The drive to West Lynn took 45 minutes through Portland's evening traffic. Marcus and Brianna's new house sat on a tree-lined street where every home looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. The colonial-style, pristine landscaping and circular driveway suggested a price tag well beyond what a car dealership manager should be able to afford, even with Brianna's income as a marketing coordinator at a local nonprofit. Cars lined both sides of the street, indicating a well-attended celebration. I recognized several vehicles belonging to family, friends, and relatives, people who'd known Marcus and me since childhood. They'd all be impressed by his apparent success, proud of how well he was doing for himself. I parked at the end of the block and walked toward the house, noting the professional landscape lighting and expensive outdoor furniture adorning the front porch. A sign near the door read "The Winters Family Home" in elegant script. Every detail spoke of careful planning and significant investment. Marcus answered the door with a huge grin, looking handsome in his navy blazer and perfectly styled hair. He'd always been the more conventionally attractive sibling, blessed with natural charm and social ease that had carried him through life. Seeing him now, successful and confident, I felt a complicated mix of pride and anger. "Natalie, you made it." He pulled me into a hug that felt genuine, which somehow made everything worse. Come in, wait until you see what we've done with the place." He led me through the foyer into a living room filled with friends and family. The space was beautifully decorated.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
With hardwood floors, crown molding and furniture that looked like it came from a showroom. Brianna appeared at his side, radiant in a cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. "Natalie, thank you so much for coming," she said, embracing me warmly. "Marcus talks about you constantly. He's so proud of your success." The words stung with their irony. Marcus was proud of my success, while simultaneously stealing from it. "The house is gorgeous," I replied, meaning it despite everything. "You've done beautiful work here." "Thank you, it's been such a project, but we're finally settled." Marcus has been incredible through the whole process. "I don't know how I got so lucky." She gazed at my brother with obvious adoration, and I felt a pang of sympathy for her. Brianna was genuinely kind, clearly in love, and had no idea that her perfect life was built on stolen money. She was as much a victim of Marcus's deception as I was. The next hour passed in a blur of small talk and forced smiles. I moved through the house, accepting compliments on Marcus's apparent success, while taking mental notes of every expensive detail. The kitchen featured granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The dining room showcased a table that seated 12. The master suite included a walk-in closet larger than my first apartment. Every room told the same story. This was a house purchased by someone with significant wealth and excellent credit. Neither description fit my brother's actual financial situation. I was admiring the view from the back deck when our father Robert joined me with a beer in his hand. At 62, he still carried himself with the quiet dignity of the high school principal he'd been for 30 years before retirement. "Beautiful place, isn't it?" he said, settling beside me on the deck railing. I have to admit, I was worried about Marcus after the divorce. But look at him now, he's really turned things around. "It's impressive," I agreed carefully. "You know he credits you with helping him get back on his feet. Says you were there for him when nobody else was." Dad's expression grew serious. "I'm proud of both my kids. You for building your business, him for bouncing back from adversity." The guilt in his voice was evident. Like many parents, Robert and Linda had played favorites over the years, often expecting more from me while making excuses for Marcus. This moment of recognition felt bittersweet, knowing what I now knew about my brother's methods. "Family takes care of family." I said, the words carrying more weight than my father could understand. "That's right, and Marcus has been taking good care of Brianna. Did you know he surprised her with a honeymoon in Hawaii? Completely planned and paid for it himself. That girl had no idea until they got to the airport." My stomach dropped. Marcus hadn't just stolen from me. He'd lied to Brianna about his generosity. She believed her husband had saved and sacrificed to give her a dream honeymoon, never knowing that every romantic moment had been purchased with someone else's money. "That's very thoughtful of him," I managed. "He's learned responsibility, finally understanding what it means to be a husband, to put someone else first." Dad clinked his beer bottle against my wine glass. "I think this marriage is going to be good for him." I excused myself and retreated to the house, needing space to process this new information. The situation was worse than I'd imagined. Marcus hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen credit for generosity, built his reputation as a loving husband on fraudulent foundations. I found myself in the kitchen, where Brianna was arranging desserts on a silver platter. She looked up when I entered, her face glowing with happiness. "I hope you don't mind me monopolizing Marcus tonight," she said with a laugh. "I keep introducing him to people like he's some kind of trophy. I just can't believe how lucky I am." "He's certainly special," I replied. "You know, I was so worried about money when we started dating. My last relationship ended because of financial stress, and I swore I'd never put myself in that position again. But Marcus has been incredible, so generous, so responsible with money. The honeymoon alone." She shook her head in amazement. "I kept telling him we couldn't afford it, and he just smiled and said he'd been saving for years to spoil the woman he loved." The room felt like it was closing in around me. Every word Brianna spoke added another layer to Marcus's deception, another reason why this betrayal cut so deep. "He must love you very much," I said. "I think so. And the house." She gestured around the beautiful kitchen. "I never imagined I'd live somewhere like this." Marcus handled all the financial stuff, worked with the mortgage company, made sure everything was perfect. I just signed papers and trusted him to take care of everything. That's when she pulled out the documents that would change everything. "Actually, I wanted to show you something," Brianna continued, reaching for a folder on the counter. "I was organizing our paperwork today and found something confusing. Maybe you can help me understand it." She opened the folder and spread several documents across the marble surface. Mortgage agreements, loan applications, credit reports, and there in black and white was my name listed as the primary applicant and financial guarantor for their dream home. The champagne flute trembled in my hand as the full scope of Marcus's betrayal became clear. He hadn't just used my credit card. He'd used my entire financial profile to secure their mortgage, forging documents and falsifying information to qualify for a loan he could never have obtained on his own. "I don't understand why your name is on our mortgage," Brianna said, her voice confused and slightly worried. Marcus said, "There must be some kind of clerical error, but I wanted to ask you about it before calling the bank." I stared at the documents, my mind racing through the implications. This wasn't just credit card fraud anymore. This was mortgage fraud, identity theft, and forgery. Marcus had committed serious felonies to build his perfect life, and he'd done it using my name, my credit, and my financial reputation. The voices from the living room seemed distant now, muffled by the rushing sound of blood in my ears. Everything I'd worked for, every careful step I'd taken to build my credit and financial stability, had been weaponized against me by the person I'd trusted most. "There's definitely been a mistake," I told Brianna, my voice surprisingly steady. "But don't worry, I'll help you figure it out." What I didn't tell her was that the mistake hadn't been made by a bank or title company. The mistake had been trusting my brother with access to my financial life. And unlike clerical errors, this mistake was going to require a much more dramatic correction. The silence in the kitchen stretched between Brianna and me like a chasm. I could hear my heartbeat echoing in my ears as I processed the magnitude of what lay before me on that marble counter. These weren't just financial documents. They were evidence of systematic fraud orchestrated by someone who shared my DNA, someone I'd protected and supported through every failure and setback of his adult life. "Natalie," Brianna's voice cut through my thoughts. "You look pale. Are you feeling all right?" I forced myself to breathe slowly, deliberately, the way I'd learned during high-stakes client presentations when millions of dollars hung in the balance. This situation required the same level of strategic thinking, the same careful control of emotions that had built my company from nothing into a powerhouse. "I'm fine," I replied, though nothing about this moment felt fine. "These documents are quite complex. Would it be possible for me to take photos of them? I'd like to review them more carefully later, maybe consult with my attorney." The lie came easier than it should have, but then I was learning that deception ran in the family. Brianna nodded eagerly, relief evident in her expression. "Of course, I was hoping you'd know what to do." Marcus said not to worry about it, that banks make mistakes all the time, but seeing your name on our mortgage just felt wrong. I pulled out my phone and methodically photographed each page, making sure to capture every detail. Credit applications with my social security number, income verification forms showing my business earnings as Marcus's salary, asset statements listing my investment properties as his holdings. The audacity was breathtaking. Marcus hadn't just stolen my credit, he'd stolen my entire financial identity and presented it as his own achievements. "Has Marcus mentioned any other unusual paperwork recently?" I asked, keeping my tone casual while documenting his crimes. Sometimes these kinds of errors appear in multiple places. Well, there was something strange with the credit card bills. I keep seeing charges from months before we were even engaged. But Marcus said those were work expenses that got mixed up in the system. Brianna pulled out another folder, this one containing credit card statements. Look at this Hawaii trip from 6 months ago. We didn't go to Hawaii until our honeymoon last month, but here's a charge for the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, dated February 15th. My blood turned to ice. February 15th was exactly 6 months ago, right around the time Marcus had started talking about this amazing woman he'd met online. He'd used my credit card to take Brianna on their first romantic getaway, then convinced her it was a billing error when she saw the statements later. The manipulation was so thorough, so calculated, that I felt nauseated. These billing errors seemed quite extensive. I managed photographing the credit card statements as well. I think we should definitely get this sorted out quickly. You're so smart about these things. Marcus always says his sister could solve any problem if you put your mind to it. Brianna's admiration felt like salt in an open wound. He's told me so many stories about how you helped him after his divorce, how you were the only person who believed in him when everyone else gave up. The irony was suffocating. Marcus had turned my genuine support into a narrative of saint-like devotion, all while systematically robbing me blind. Every kind thing I'd done for him had been reframed as evidence of my unlimited willingness to sacrifice for his happiness. Family is important, I said, the words tasting bitter. We have to take care of each other. That's exactly what Marcus says. He's so grateful for everything you've done. He told me about the credit card you gave him during the divorce, how you saved his life when he had nowhere else to turn. Brianna's eyes grew misty with emotion. He said he could never repay you for that kindness. He was right about that. He could never repay me, because repayment would require acknowledging what he'd taken. And from everything I was seeing, Marcus had no intention of acknowledging anything. The sound of laughter from the living room reminded me that we were in the middle of a party celebrating Marcus's success. 20 feet away, friends and family were toasting his achievements, praising his transformation from divorced deadbeat to successful homeowner. If only they knew that every element of this success story was built on fraud. I should probably get back to the party, I said, slipping my phone into my purse. But let me make some calls tomorrow and see what I can find out about these documents.
Thank you so much. I feel so much better knowing you're looking into it. Brianna hugged me tightly, and I felt like the worst person alive for deceiving her. But what was the alternative? Destroying her happiness in the middle of her own celebration, revealing that her husband was a criminal who'd built their entire life on stolen money. I returned to the living room where Marcus was holding court near the fireplace, regaling a group of relatives with stories about his house hunting process. He looked confident and relaxed, every inch the successful man who'd earned his prosperity through hard work and smart decisions. The key was patience, he was saying to our cousin Mike and his wife. Brianna wanted to jump on the first house we saw, but I insisted we wait for the right opportunity. When this place came on the market, I knew it was perfect. The financing came together beautifully, everything fell into place exactly like it was meant to be. Our eyes met across the room, and Marcus smiled with genuine warmth. There was no guilt in his expression, no hint that he'd done anything wrong. He believed his own narrative so completely that he'd forgotten the truth behind it. Or maybe he'd never acknowledged the truth to begin with. I spent the rest of the party observing him with new eyes, studying his interactions, and listening to his stories with the perspective of someone who now understood his methods. Marcus was a master at reframing reality, at turning his failures into learning experiences and his shortcuts into strategic thinking. He'd convinced everyone, including himself, that he'd earned everything he had. The performance was flawless. When guests complimented the house, Marcus graciously accepted credit while deflecting praise to Brianna's decorating skills. When people asked about his promotion at the dealership, he spoke modestly about recognizing opportunities and working hard to prove himself. When relatives mentioned how proud our parents must be, he talked about learning from past mistakes and growing as a person. Not once did he mention my contribution to his success. Not once did he acknowledge that his transformation had been funded by someone else's money. In Marcus's version of events, he was the hero of his own story, the man who'd overcome adversity through determination and character. Carmen arrived fashionably late, having finished the client presentation I'd abandoned earlier that day. She found me on the back deck, where I'd retreated to process everything I'd learned. "How are you holding up?" she asked, settling beside me with a glass of wine. "You look like you're planning someone's funeral." "Maybe I am," I replied. "Carmen, it's worse than we thought." Much worse. I showed her the photos on my phone, watching her expression shift from confusion to anger to outright shock as the scope of Marcus's fraud became clear. This is identity theft, she said flatly. This is mortgage fraud. This is serious federal crime territory, Natalie. You could have him arrested tonight. I know. The words felt heavy on my tongue, but it's complicated. How is this complicated? He stole your identity to buy a house. He's been using your credit for months without permission. He's committed multiple felonies. He's also my brother, and Brianna has no idea. She thinks she married a responsible man who saved up for their honeymoon and qualified for this mortgage through his own hard work. I gestured toward the house where the party continued. Everyone in there thinks Marcus turned his life around through personal growth and determination. Carmen studied my face in the dim light from the house. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Marcus needs to learn. There are consequences for his choices. But I'm also thinking that there might be a way to handle this that doesn't destroy everyone else's life in the process. Such as, I'd been formulating a plan since the moment I saw those mortgage documents. It was risky, potentially expensive, and would require careful timing. But it would accomplish something that simply having Marcus arrested couldn't. It would force him to face the reality of what he'd done while giving me the power to control how that reckoning unfolded. I'm going to let him keep the house, I said quietly. For now. Carmen nearly choked on her wine. You're going to what? Think about it. The mortgage is in my name, which means I'm legally responsible for it. But it also means I have certain rights. I can choose to honor the payments, or I can choose to let it default. I can choose to inform the lender about the fraud, or I can choose to handle this privately. You're talking about enabling him. No, I'm talking about controlling him. Right now Marcus thinks he got away with it. He thinks his fraud was successful, and that he can continue living this life without consequences. But what happens when he learns that I know everything? What happens when he realizes that his dream house, his perfect life, his entire identity as a successful man depends entirely on my continued cooperation? Understanding dawned in Carmen's eyes. You're going to make him dependent on you. I'm going to make him accountable to me. Every payment, every decision, every aspect of the life he built on my credit will require my approval. He'll learn what it really means to have someone else control your financial destiny. And if he refuses, if he tries to fight you, I smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. Then I have documented evidence of multiple felonies. I have photographs of forged documents. I have bank records showing systematic fraud. Marcus's choice will be simple. Accept my terms, or explain his situation to federal prosecutors. Carmen was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. This is dangerous, Natalie. You're talking about a long-term commitment to managing his debt and monitoring his behavior. What if he does something else? What if he escalates? Then I'll escalate too. But I think Marcus is too comfortable with his new life to risk losing it. He's worked too hard to build this image of success, to throw it away for pride. What about Brianna? She doesn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this. That was the part of my plan that troubled me most. Brianna was genuinely innocent, a victim of Marcus's deception just as much as I was. But protecting her would require a delicate balance between justice and mercy. Brianna will be protected as long as Marcus cooperates. She can keep the house, keep her illusions about her husband's success, keep the life she thinks they built together. But Marcus will know the truth. He'll know that every day he spends in that house is a gift from the sister he stole from. The party was winding down when Carmen and I returned to the living room. Guests were saying their goodbyes, complimenting Marcus and Brianna on their beautiful home and expressing hopes for future gatherings. The atmosphere was warm and celebratory, filled with the kind of genuine happiness that made my knowledge feel like a burden. I found Marcus in the kitchen, loading expensive plates into an expensive dishwasher, looking every inch the successful homeowner cleaning up after a successful party. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said, pulling me into another hug. "It means everything to have you here sharing this moment with us." The embrace felt different now that I knew the truth. His gratitude was real, but it was gratitude for unknowing complicity in his fraud. He was thanking me for being the kind of sister who would help him celebrate his success, without asking too many questions about how that success was achieved. "The house is beautiful," I replied, meaning it despite everything. "You and Brianna have built something really special here." "We have, haven't we?" His smile was genuinely proud. "I know I made some mistakes in my first marriage, but I've learned from them. This time, I'm doing everything right." The statement was so tone-deaf, so completely disconnected from reality, that I almost laughed. Marcus genuinely believed he was doing everything right, while committing multiple felonies to fund his lifestyle. The cognitive dissonance was breathtaking. "I'm proud of you," I said, testing the words to see how they felt. "They tasted like ash. That means more to me than you know. You were there for me when I had nothing, when everyone else had given up on me. I'll never forget that kindness." He was right that he'd never forget it, but he was about to learn that kindness had limits, and that taking advantage of generosity eventually came with a price. I left the party with a head full of plans and a phone full of evidence. The drive back to my condo gave me time to think through the logistics of what I was contemplating. Managing Marcus's fraud would require careful documentation, regular monitoring, and constant vigilance. It would mean inserting myself into his financial life in ways that would make both of us uncomfortable. But it would also mean that justice was served on my terms, in my time frame, with outcomes that I could control. Marcus would learn the cost of betraying family trust, but he'd learn it gradually, over time, in ways that would force him to confront the reality of his choices, without destroying the innocent people around him. The next morning brought clarity and determination. I called my attorney first, then my accountant, then my bank. By noon, I had a complete picture of my legal options and financial exposure. The mortgage Marcus had obtained in my name was legitimate from the lender's perspective. They'd received properly notarized documents, and had every reason to believe I was the actual applicant. Proving fraud would require extensive investigation, and would likely result in criminal charges. But there was another option. I could choose to assume responsibility for the mortgage, effectively making Marcus's fraud irrelevant from a legal standpoint. The lender would have their guaranteed payments, Marcus would keep his house, and I would have complete control over both. It would cost me approximately $4,000 per month for the next 25 years. But it would also give me something money couldn't buy: the power to determine Marcus's fate, one payment at a time. I was reviewing the mortgage terms when Carmen knocked on my office door with coffee and a concerned expression. "Please tell me you're not seriously considering paying for your brother's house," she said, settling into her usual chair across from my desk. "I'm seriously considering a lot of things. Paying for the house is just one option. An expensive option that rewards his criminal behavior. An investment in justice. Marcus wants to live like a successful man. Fine, but he'll live like a successful man who answers to his sister for every financial decision he makes." Carmen shook her head. "You're playing with fire, Natalie. What happens when he finds out you know? What happens when he realizes you're controlling his debt? Then we'll find out what kind of man my brother really is. Will he be grateful for the opportunity to avoid prison? Will he be humble enough to accept responsibility for his choices? Or will he be angry that his victim refused to stay victimized?" The answer to that question would determine everything that happened next. But I suspected I already knew what kind of man Marcus was. He was the kind who would take whatever he could get away with, who would rationalize his behavior until it seemed justified, who would always find someone else to blame for his problems. He was also the kind who would be absolutely devastated to lose the life he'd built, even if that life was constructed on lies. My phone rang while I was considering my options. The caller ID showed Marcus's number, and for a moment I debated letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity won out. "Hey Marcus, how are you feeling after last night?" "Great, a little tired, but what a party, right? Brianna's still floating on cloud nine." His voice carried the satisfaction of a man who believed his performance had been flawless. "Listen, I wanted to thank you again for coming. It really meant a lot to have family there. Of course, I wouldn't have missed it. Actually, there's something I wanted to run by you. Brianna mentioned you offered to help with some paperwork confusion, something about the mortgage documents." My heart rate accelerated. This was it. The moment when Marcus would learn that his fraud had been discovered. The moment when everything changed between us. Yes, she showed me some documents that had my name on them. Quite unusual. There was a pause that lasted several heartbeats too long. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had lost some of its casual confidence. "Right, yeah, that's weird. Must be some kind of bank error. You know how these big institutions are with paperwork. They mix up files all the time." It seemed pretty comprehensive for a simple mix-up. My social security number, my income information, my asset listings. Almost like someone used my financial profile to apply for a mortgage. The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. I could practically hear Marcus's mind racing, trying to formulate an explanation that would make this conversation go away. That's really strange," he finally managed. "I can't imagine how that would happen. I can think of a few ways it might happen. But I'm more interested in discussing what happens next. What do you mean? I mean, Marcus, that we need to have a conversation about your finances, about your credit card usage, about your mortgage application, about the difference between borrowing money and stealing it. Another long pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was smaller, deflated, the voice of a man who just realized his game was over. Natalie, I can explain. Good. I'm very interested in hearing that explanation. But not over the phone. Meet me at Higgins' restaurant tomorrow at 7. Come alone. We have a lot to discuss. I hung up before he could respond, leaving him to spend the next 24 hours contemplating exactly how much trouble he was. Tomorrow's conversation would determine whether Marcus was capable of accepting responsibility for his actions, or whether he would force me to pursue more dramatic measures. Either way, the naive sister who had unknowingly funded his fraud was gone forever. In her place was a woman who understood exactly what her brother was, and who was prepared to ensure he never forgot the cost of his choices. The game had changed. The only question now was whether Marcus was smart enough to learn the new rules, or stubborn enough to test just how far his sister was willing to go to teach him about consequences. I spent the evening reviewing every detail of his fraud, preparing for a conversation that would reshape our relationship permanently. By tomorrow night, Marcus would understand that his sister wasn't just successful, she was strategic, and she was done being taken advantage. The reckoning was coming, and it would be served exactly the way Marcus had served his betrayal, one calculated move at a time. Higgins' restaurant buzzed with the quiet sophistication of downtown Portland's business district, its dim lighting and intimate booths, creating the perfect atmosphere for conversations that would never make it into casual dinner party stories. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table where I could observe the entire restaurant while maintaining privacy for what promised to be the most difficult conversation of my adult life. The server, a young woman with kind eyes and professional demeanor, brought me a glass of the house Pinot Noir without my asking. I'd been a regular here for years, conducting client meetings and closing deals in these same leather banquets. Tonight felt different. Tonight I wasn't negotiating a marketing contract or discussing campaign strategies. Tonight I was about to confront my brother with evidence of his systematic betrayal, and offer him a choice between accountability and prison. Marcus arrived exactly on time, which surprised me. Punctuality had never been his strength, but tonight he understood the stakes. He looked older than he had at the party just 2 nights ago. Stress lines etched around his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that suggested he'd spent the intervening hours contemplating exactly how much trouble he was in. He spotted me immediately and approached the table with the careful gait of a man walking to his own execution. Gone was the confident swagger from the housewarming party, replaced by the hesitant uncertainty of someone who knew their lies had finally caught up with them. "Natalie," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. His voice carried a forced casualness that fooled neither of us. "Thanks for meeting with me." "Thank you for coming alone," I replied, noting that he'd followed that instruction despite probably wanting moral support for this conversation. "I ordered you a beer, Sam Adams. Still your preference?" "Yeah, thanks." He accepted the drink gratefully, taking a long swallow before meeting my eyes. "So, about those documents Brianna showed you. Before we discuss those documents, I want you to understand something very clearly." I kept my voice level, professional, the same tone I used when delivering bad news to clients. "This conversation will determine everything that happens next. Your honesty, your willingness to accept responsibility, your commitment to making things right, all of that will influence decisions that could affect the rest of your life." Marcus's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Okay. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want complete honesty. Not the kind of selective truth-telling you've perfected over the years. Not the charming deflections that have gotten you out of trouble since childhood. Complete total honesty about what you've done and why you did it." He nodded, though I could see the internal struggle playing out across his features. Marcus had spent his entire adult life avoiding full accountability for his actions, always finding ways to minimize his responsibility or shift blame to circumstances beyond his control. "Let's start with the credit card. When was the last time you used the American Express account I gave you during your divorce?" "Yesterday," he admitted quietly. "I bought groceries at Whole Foods." The immediate honesty surprised me, though it was such a small admission that it barely counted as truth-telling. "And before yesterday, I've been using it regularly for about 8 months. His fingers drummed nervously against the table, maybe longer. "For what purposes?" "Everything. Groceries, gas, restaurants, clothes." He paused, then added in a rush, The Hawaii trip for our honeymoon. What did you tell Brianna about how you paid for that honeymoon? This question hit harder. Marcus winced visibly, understanding that I wasn't just asking about financial fraud, but about the lies he'd told the woman he claimed to love. I told her I'd been saving money for years, that I wanted to surprise her with something special. So you let her believe that you had saved approximately $27,000 from your salary as a car dealership manager. Yes, and when she saw the credit card statements showing charges from months before your honeymoon, what explanation did you give her? I said they were billing errors, that the bank had mixed up some work expenses. His voice grew smaller with each admission. She believed me because she trusts me. She trusted you, I corrected. Now let's talk about the mortgage. When did you decide to use my identity to qualify for a home loan? Marcus flinched at the directness of the question. It wasn't supposed to be like that. I mean, I wasn't trying to steal your identity or anything criminal. I needed help qualifying. And I knew you had excellent credit. So you forged my signature on mortgage documents. I didn't forge anything. I used DocuSign with your email address. And I know your security questions from when we were kids. The casual way he described accessing my financial accounts sent a chill down my spine. Marcus wasn't just admitting to fraud. He was revealing a level of premeditation that made his crimes feel even more personal. You used my email address without my permission, answered my security questions without my knowledge, and signed legal documents in my name. What would you call that if it wasn't forgery? I was going to tell you about it, he said desperately. I was going to explain everything, and work out a way to pay you back. I just needed some time to get established in the new job, to build up my savings. When exactly were you planning to tell me that you'd committed mortgage fraud using my identity? I don't know. Soon, maybe after the first year, when I could show you that I was making all the payments on time. Except you weren't making the payments on time, were you, Marcus? I've seen the mortgage account. 3 payments have already been late, and one was nearly 30 days overdue. His face crumpled at this revelation. Business has been slow at the dealership. Commission sales are unpredictable, and with the new house expenses.
So not only did you steal my identity to buy a house you couldn't afford, but you're already falling behind on payments for a mortgage that's legally my responsibility. I'll catch up. I always do. The third quarter is usually better for car sales, and I'm tracking toward a good month. Marcus, do you understand the legal implications of what you've done? Do you comprehend that mortgage fraud is a federal felony punishable by up to 30 years in prison? The color drained from his face. 30 years. And that's just for the mortgage fraud. Identity theft, wire fraud, credit card fraud, each charge carries its own penalties. You could be looking at decades in federal prison. But I'm your brother, he whispered, as if family connection could somehow negate the severity of his crimes. That makes it worse, not better. You didn't steal from a stranger or a corporation. You stole from someone who loved you, who had already helped you, who trusted you with access to her financial life. Marcus began to cry then, not the manipulative tears he'd used to get out of trouble as a child, but the genuine sobs of a man who was finally grasping the magnitude of his situation. I'm sorry, he choked out. I'm so sorry, Natalie. I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted to give Brianna the life she deserved, and I couldn't afford it on my own. So you decided to steal mine. I didn't think of it as stealing. I thought of it as borrowing, as family helping family. I thought I could pay you back before you ever found out. And if you couldn't pay me back, if your car sales didn't improve, or if you lost your job, what happens to my credit, my financial reputation, my ability to qualify for loans when your borrowed identity defaulted on a mortgage? He had no answer for that because he'd never considered the consequences for anyone but himself. Marcus had always been skilled at externalizing the costs of his decisions, at making his problems into everyone else's responsibility. What do you want from me? He asked finally. What can I do to make this right? This was the moment I'd been building toward, the opportunity to propose the terms that would govern our relationship going forward. I reached into my purse and withdrew a folder containing documents I'd prepared over the past 2 days. I've spent considerable time researching your situation and considering my options, I began. I could report your crimes to the FBI and let federal prosecutors handle this matter. You'd be arrested, probably within the week. Brianna would lose the house when the mortgage was voided due to fraud. Your life as you know it would be over. Marcus's breathing became shallow and rapid. Please don't do that. Please, Natalie, I'll do anything. Alternatively, I could choose to assume responsibility for the financial obligations you've created in my name. I could make the mortgage payments,
honor the credit card debt, and allow you to continue living the life you've built on stolen money. Hope flickered in his eyes, though he was smart enough to realize there would be conditions attached to such generosity. But if I choose that option, it won't be charity. It will be a business arrangement with very specific terms that you will follow without question or deviation. I opened the folder and spread several documents across the table between us. These are the conditions under which I would be willing to prevent your immediate arrest and incarceration. Marcus leaned forward, scanning the papers with growing alarm. What is all this? A comprehensive financial management agreement. If you want to avoid prison, you'll sign these documents and abide by every term for the duration of the mortgage. 25 years. His voice cracked on the numbers. The same 25 years you committed me to when you forged my signature on the original mortgage documents. He read through the conditions with mounting dismay. The agreement was thorough, covering every aspect of his financial life and establishing my authority over major decisions. You want access to all my bank accounts. I want transparency. If I'm going to be responsible for debts you incur, I need to monitor your spending and ensure you're not creating additional financial obligations I'll be expected to cover. You want me to get permission before making any purchase over $200. I want you to understand that living beyond your means has consequences. You've proven you can't be trusted to make responsible financial decisions, so those decisions will now require approval from someone who can. You want 50% of my monthly income. I want reimbursement for the mortgage payments I'll be making on your behalf. 50% of your current salary will cover approximately half of what you've obligated me to pay. I'll cover the remainder as an expensive lesson about trusting family members. Marcus stared at the documents as if they were a death sentence. In many ways, they were. The agreement would effectively place him under financial guardianship, stripping away the independence and autonomy he'd taken for granted. What about Brianna? What does she know about all this? Nothing for now. As far as your wife is concerned, you've successfully purchased a home through your own efforts and qualify for the mortgage based on your income and credit history. Whether she continues to believe that fiction depends entirely on your compliance with these terms. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a choice. Prison or accountability. Federal charges or family management. The destruction of your life or the restructuring of it under my supervision. This isn't family management, Natalie. This is financial slavery. This is the consequence of theft, Marcus. This is what happens when you steal from someone who has the power to destroy you but chooses mercy instead. He was quiet for a long time, reading through the terms again, and calculating the full impact of what I was proposing. Under the agreement, he would essentially become my financial dependent, requiring permission for major purchases and surrendering half his income to cover the debts he'd created in my name. What happens if I refuse? What happens if I don't sign this? Then I report your crimes to federal authorities tomorrow morning. The mortgage will be voided due to fraud, the house will go into foreclosure, and you'll be arrested on multiple felony charges. Brianna will learn the truth about your financial situation when FBI agents show up at your workplace. And if I sign, then we handle this privately. You keep the house, keep your wife's respect, keep the life you've built on my credit. But you do it under my terms, with my oversight, and with the constant understanding that your continued freedom depends on my continued cooperation. Marcus pushed the documents away and leaned back in the booth, staring at the ceiling as if searching for divine intervention or a third option that didn't exist. How do I know you won't change the terms later? How do I know you won't use this against me forever? You don't. Just like I didn't know you were using my credit card for months without permission. Just like I didn't know you were forging documents in my name to buy a house. Trust works both ways. Marcus and you destroyed it first. This will ruin my marriage. When Brianna finds out that I can't make any financial decisions without my sister's permission, when she learns that half my salary goes to you every month, she'll know something's wrong. Then you'll have to be creative in your explanations. You'll have to become as skilled at managing the truth as you were at avoiding it. What if I can't do it? What if the restrictions are too much and I mess up? Then you'll face the consequences of messing up. The same consequences you should have faced months ago when you first decided to steal from me. The server approached our table to check on our drinks and ask about dinner orders. We'd been talking for over an hour, and neither of us had touched the menus. I ordered another glass of wine and told her we needed more time. Marcus ordered a whiskey, double neat. I need to think about this, he said when we were alone again. You have until tomorrow at 5 p.m. If these documents aren't signed and notarized by then, I make the phone call to federal authorities. And then what? After I sign, what happens next? Then you go home to your wife and continue living the life you stole. But you do it knowing that every day in that house, every night in that bed, every moment of happiness you experience is a gift from the sister you betrayed. You really hate me, don't you? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on justice and accountability that I hadn't examined my actual feelings toward Marcus. Did I hate him, or was I just devastated by his betrayal? I hate what you've done, I said finally. I hate that you stole from me, lied to me and put my financial security at risk without asking. I hate that you let me celebrate your success knowing it was built on fraud. I hate that you made me complicit in your deception without my knowledge or consent. But do you hate me? I don't know yet. Ask me again in a year, after we see whether you're capable of living up to the terms of this agreement. Marcus finished his whiskey in one swallow, and stared at the empty glass, as if it might contain answers to questions he wasn't ready to ask. What happens to us? To our relationship, after all this? Can we ever be siblings again, or will I always be your debtor? That depends on you. You can choose to see this as punishment for past mistakes, or you can choose to see it as an opportunity to rebuild trust through consistent, honest behavior. Under your supervision. Under my protection. Marcus, you committed felonies. Multiple federal crimes that could send you to prison for decades. I'm offering you a way to avoid those consequences while making restitution for what you've taken. In any other context, with any other victim, you'd be in handcuffs already. I know, his voice was barely audible. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve your help. Deserving has nothing to do with it. This isn't about what you deserve. This is about what I'm willing to give, and what you're willing to accept. He was quiet for another long moment, and I could see him wrestling with the reality of his situation. The fantasy world he'd built, where his fraud was just temporary borrowing, and his success was earned through hard work, was crumbling around him. If I sign these papers, how do I explain it to Brianna? How do I tell her that her successful husband suddenly needs his sister's permission to buy a car or take a vacation? The same way you explained the credit card charges and the mortgage discrepancies. Creatively, you want me to keep lying to her. I want you to protect her from the consequences of your choices. Brianna married a man she believed was responsible and financially stable. Whether she continues to believe that is up to you. This is impossible. There's no way I can hide something this big from my wife. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you committed mortgage fraud. Maybe you should have considered how your crimes would affect your marriage before you decided to build that marriage on stolen money. Marcus put his head in his hands, the weight of his situation finally settling on his shoulders. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far, and now we're here, in this restaurant negotiating the terms of your continued freedom. You can either accept responsibility for the choices that brought us to this moment, or you can face the full legal consequences of those choices. What happens if I try to transfer the house to someone else? What if I try to sell it, and pay you back? The mortgage is in my name, remember? Any sale or transfer would require my signature. Besides, you'd never qualify for another mortgage after I report the fraud on this one. So I'm trapped. You're accountable. There's a difference. The restaurant was beginning to empty around us, couples and business associates finishing their meals, and heading home to lives that weren't balanced on the edge of federal prosecution. I envied them their simple problems, their ordinary concerns about work deadlines and family obligations. I need to ask you something, Marcus said suddenly. And I need you to be honest with me. I've been nothing but honest with you tonight. Are you enjoying this? Watching me squirm, having this kind of power over my life? The question forced me to examine my motivations more deeply than I wanted to. Was there satisfaction in Marcus's discomfort? Did I take pleasure in his realization that actions had consequences? I'm not enjoying any of this, I said truthfully. I'm devastated that my brother stole from me. I'm heartbroken that someone I trusted and supported would repay that trust with systematic fraud. I'm angry that you put me in a position where I have to choose between enabling your crimes and destroying your life. But you're not backing down. No, I'm not backing down. Because backing down would send a message that stealing from family members is acceptable as long as you're charming enough to make excuses later. And you think this agreement will teach me a lesson. I think this agreement will force you to live with the consequences of your choices while giving you an opportunity to demonstrate that you're capable of change." Marcus signaled for the check, a gesture that would have been routine 2 days ago, but now carried different weight. He was about to use a credit card linked to accounts I'd soon be monitoring, making a purchase that would need to fit within budgets I'd be setting. "I'll sign your papers," he said quietly. "Not because I think they're fair, but because I don't have any other choice." "That's the first completely honest thing you've said tonight. When do you want to meet tomorrow?" "My office 4 p.m. Bring 2 forms of ID, and be prepared to have the documents notarized." "And then what?" "Then we begin the next phase of our relationship. The phase where you prove that Marcus Winters can be trusted to keep his word and honor his commitments." "What if I can't do it? What if living under these restrictions is too much?" "Then you'll learn what it feels like to lose everything you've built through deception. But Marcus, you'll learn it from a federal prison cell, instead of from the comfort of the house you bought with my credit." He paid the check with cash, perhaps already beginning to adjust to a reality where every transaction would be scrutinized, and every purchase would require justification. We walked out of the restaurant together, but headed towards separate cars, separate lives that were now permanently intertwined through documents and debt. "Natalie," he called, as I reached my car. "I really am sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. Intent doesn't matter anymore, Marcus. Only actions matter now, only what you do going forward." I drove home through the quiet streets of Portland, past the ordinary houses of ordinary families dealing with ordinary problems. My life had become something else entirely, something complicated by fraud and betrayal, and the terrible burden of holding someone else's fate in my hands. Tomorrow Marcus would sign papers that would fundamentally alter the balance of power between us.
Tomorrow.
He would begin learning what it meant to live under someone else's financial control, to have his independence curtailed by the consequences of his own choices. And tomorrow I would begin the long process of determining whether my brother was capable of redemption, or whether some betrayals were simply too deep to forgive. The sound of Marcus's footsteps echoed through the marble lobby of my office building at exactly 3:47 p.m. I watched from my corner office window as he approached the entrance, his shoulders squared, with what appeared to be determination, but might have been resignation. 13 minutes early for an appointment that would reshape both our lives permanently. Carmen knocked once, and entered without waiting for permission, a habit we'd developed over years of partnership. She carried a manila envelope, and wore the expression of someone who'd spent the morning ensuring every legal detail was perfect. "The notary is here," she announced. "Jennifer Morrison from Cascade Legal Services. She's reviewed all the documents and confirmed they're properly formatted for execution. And our attorney, David Chen, is standing by via video conference. He's reviewed the agreement one final time and confirms it's legally binding in Oregon. He also wanted me to remind you that once Marcus signs, you'll be committed to these terms as well." I nodded, understanding the weight of that reminder. This agreement wouldn't just restrict Marcus's financial freedom, it would obligate me to monitor his compliance, review his expenses, and maintain oversight of his life, for the next quarter century. It was a burden I was choosing to accept in lieu of criminal prosecution. "Is he ready?" Carmen asked, glancing toward the elevator bank visible through my office windows. "As ready as someone can be for voluntary financial imprisonment." Marcus emerged from the elevator wearing his best suit, the charcoal gray one he reserved for important sales presentations and formal events. His appearance was impeccable, from his freshly cut hair to his polished leather shoes, but I could see the tension in his posture, the careful way he moved like someone trying not to disturb a house of cards. Carmen escorted him to our largest conference room, the one we typically used for major client presentations and contract signings. The irony wasn't lost on me that the space where I'd closed million-dollar marketing deals would now host the signing of documents that would effectively make my brother my financial dependent. Jennifer Morrison, the notary, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor that suggested she'd presided over countless document signings, though probably none quite like this one. She'd arranged her supplies meticulously across one end of the conference table: stamps, seals, logbooks, and certification forms. "Good afternoon, Mr. Winters." She greeted Marcus with the same warm professionalism she'd show any client. "I understand we have several documents requiring notarization today." "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice steadier than I'd expected. "Several documents. I took my seat across from him, the polished mahogany table creating a physical barrier that seemed to symbolize the emotional distance his betrayal had created between us. The conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Portland's skyline, a reminder of the city where we'd both built our adult lives, though through very different methods. Before we begin, I said, I want to make sure you understand that once these documents are signed and notarized, they become legally binding contracts. There's no cooling-off period, no opportunity to change your mind next week when the restrictions start feeling burdensome. Marcus met my gaze directly for the first time since entering the room. I understand, and you understand that violation of any term in these agreements will result in immediate termination of our arrangement and referral of your crimes to federal prosecutors. I understand that too. Jennifer opened her logbook and began the formal verification process. Mr. Winters, I need to confirm your identity before we proceed. Do you have 2 forms of identification with you? He produced his driver's license and passport, documents that Jennifer examined carefully before recording the information in her official log. The routine nature of her questions created an almost surreal atmosphere, as if we were conducting ordinary business, rather than negotiating the terms of Marcus's continued freedom. The first document, I began, sliding a thick packet across the table, establishes the financial oversight agreement. This gives me authority to monitor all your bank accounts, review all purchases over $200, and approve or deny major financial decisions. Marcus picked up the document and began reading, though I knew he'd already reviewed every clause during our restaurant meeting. His eyes moved across the pages methodically, perhaps hoping to find some loophole or escape clause that hadn't been there 24 hours earlier. Section 12 discusses the monthly reporting requirements, I continued. By the 5th of each month, you'll provide detailed statements from all financial accounts, credit card bills, and receipts for any cash transactions over $50. $50. He looked up from the papers. That's monitoring everything. That's ensuring accountability for everything. Cash transactions are how people hide spending when they're being monitored electronically. The grocery store, gas stations, coffee shops, everything will need receipts. Everything over $50. Yes, smaller purchases can be documented through bank and credit card statements. Jennifer waited patiently as Marcus absorbed the implications. Her role was purely administrative, but I could see her taking mental notes about the unusual nature of this signing. Most notarized documents involved straightforward business deals or property transfers, not agreements that would govern one adult's relationship to another for the next 25 years. The second document, I said, sliding another packet across the table, establishes the mortgage payment arrangement. You'll transfer 50% of your gross monthly income to an account I'll establish specifically for covering the mortgage, insurance, and property taxes on the house. 50% of gross income means before taxes, Marcus said, more to himself than to me. That's going to leave me with about $1,500 a month after you take your share and the government takes theirs. That's approximately what you were living on before you started using my credit card. Consider it a return to your actual income level. What if I get a raise? What if my commission numbers improve? Then 50% of the increased income also goes toward mortgage payments. The percentage doesn't change based on your earnings. Marcus flipped through the mortgage document, his expression growing more troubled with each page. What about emergencies? What if the car breaks down or we have a medical expense? Emergency expenses over $500 require my pre-approval. For amounts under that threshold, you'll need to manage within your allocated budget. And if you're unavailable, what if there's an emergency and I can't reach you for approval? Then you'll learn the importance of planning ahead and maintaining emergency savings within your budget restrictions. The third document was the most comprehensive and in many ways the most invasive. It established my authority to conduct periodic audits of his financial life, to interview vendors and service providers, and to require documentation for any transaction that seemed inconsistent with his declared income and approved expenses. This gives you the right to contact my employer, Marcus said, reading through the audit provisions. You can verify my income directly with Premier Auto Group. If I have reason to believe you're misrepresenting your earnings. Yes, transparency works both ways, Marcus. If you want me to trust that you're complying with our agreement, I need the ability to verify your compliance independently. What about Brianna? This document mentions interviewing family members about household expenses.
If there are discrepancies between your reported expenses and your actual lifestyle, I may need to understand where additional money is coming from.
You want to interrogate my wife about our spending? I want to ensure that you're not creating new financial obligations that you'll expect me to cover. If you and Brianna start living beyond the means we've established in this agreement, I need to understand how that's being funded. The fourth document addressed what would happen if Marcus's employment situation changed. Job loss, career moves, changes in commission structure, even voluntary resignation required my notification within 48 hours. I can't quit my job without your permission. You can quit your job, but doing so without 48 hours advance notice would constitute a violation of our agreement. I need time to assess how changes in your income will affect the mortgage payments and budget allocations. What if I get fired for something that's not my fault? Then we'll work together to manage the financial implications. But Marcus, if you get fired for cause if your employment ends because of behavior or performance issues, that will be treated differently than a layoff or company downsizing. Jennifer had been listening to our exchange with growing fascination. As a notary, she'd probably witnessed hundreds of contract signings, but the personal nature of these agreements clearly surprised her. I have a question about enforceability, she said. These documents create what's essentially a financial guardianship arrangement between adults. I want to make sure both parties understand that courts can modify or dissolve such agreements under certain circumstances. What circumstances? Marcus asked immediately. Typically, if one party can demonstrate that the agreement was signed under duress or that compliance has become impossible due to changed circumstances. Like if I lose my job through no fault of my own. Jennifer looked to me for guidance on how to answer. This was the closest Marcus had come to suggesting he might challenge the agreement legally. The documents include provisions for employment changes, I said carefully. Temporary job loss doesn't automatically void the agreement, but sustained inability to meet the financial obligations would require renegotiation. What about duress? Marcus pressed. What if I signed these documents because I was threatened with criminal prosecution? Were you threatened with criminal prosecution? Jennifer asked, her professional demeanor sharpening slightly. I could see Marcus weighing his options, considering whether claiming duress might provide an escape route from the restrictions he was about to accept. Marcus, I said quietly, you should answer Jennifer's question honestly, but you should also consider that claiming duress would require you to explain the circumstances that led to these documents being necessary. He understood the implication. Claiming duress would mean admitting to the financial crimes that had made this agreement necessary, which would likely result in the criminal prosecution he was trying to avoid. No, he said finally. I wasn't threatened. I'm signing these documents voluntarily to resolve a financial dispute with my sister. Jennifer made a note in her logbook and continued with the notarization process. Winters, do you swear that you are signing these documents of your own free will, that you understand their contents, and that no one has forced or coerced you into this agreement? I do. The formal language seemed to snap something into focus for Marcus. This wasn't just a family conversation anymore. This was a legal proceeding that would create binding obligations enforceable through the court system. Miss Winters, Jennifer continued, do you swear that these documents accurately represent the agreement you've reached with Mr. Winters and that you intend to be bound by their terms? I do. Jennifer began the methodical process of witnessing signatures, applying notary seals, and completing the certification paperwork that would make our agreement official. Each signature, each seal, each stamp created another layer of legal obligation that would govern our relationship for the next 25 years. As Marcus signed his name for the fourth time, I noticed his hand trembling slightly. The magnitude of what he was committing to had finally settled in completely. He was surrendering financial autonomy, accepting oversight that would extend into every aspect of his economic life, and trusting his future to the mercy of someone he'd betrayed. There's one more document, I said when Jennifer had finished notarizing the main agreements. This one is optional, but I recommend you consider it carefully. I slid a final packet across the table, thinner than the others but potentially more important for Marcus's long-term well-being. This is a disclosure agreement template. It provides language you can use to tell Brianna about our arrangement without revealing the criminal behavior that made it necessary. Marcus read through the disclosure document with growing relief. It presented our agreement as a business arrangement, describing me as a co-investor in their home purchase who required certain oversight provisions to protect my financial interests. This makes it sound like a legitimate business deal, he said. It is a legitimate business deal, Marcus. The circumstances that led to it may have been illegitimate, but the agreement itself is a legal contract between consenting adults. And if I use this language with Brianna, she won't know about the fraud. She'll know that I have financial involvement in your house and that certain restrictions come with that involvement. Whether she asks follow-up questions that lead to deeper revelations will depend on how convincingly you present the situation. What if she wants to pay you back immediately? What if she insists we sell the house and get out from under your oversight? Then you'll need to explain why that's not possible without revealing information that would damage your marriage. The disclosure document was perhaps the cruelest element of the entire arrangement. It provided Marcus with a way to maintain his marriage while living under my control, but only if he could convincingly present financial servitude as a voluntary business partnership. Jennifer completed the notarization of the disclosure document and began packing her supplies. All documents have been properly executed and notarized, she announced. You'll each receive certified copies and I'll file the required paperwork with the state. Thank you, Jennifer, I said, walking her to the conference room door. I appreciate your professionalism and discretion. Of course, I hope your business arrangement works out well for both parties. When Jennifer left, Marcus and I sat alone in the conference room surrounded by the signed documents that had just fundamentally altered our relationship. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the table where we'd just negotiated the terms of his financial future. So what happens now? He asked. Now you go home to your wife and begin figuring out how to live within the constraints we've established. When do the restrictions start? Immediately. Tonight, if you want to make any purchase over $200, you need my approval first. And the monthly payments, I'll set up the account tomorrow. Your first transfer of 50% of your gross income is due by the end of next week. Marcus gathered his copies of the signed documents and prepared to leave. At the conference room door, he turned back to face me. Natalie, I want you to know that I'm going to make this work. I'm going to prove that I can live up to these agreements. I hope so, Marcus, for both our sakes. What if I do? What if I comply with every term, make every payment on time, never violate any restriction? Will you ever forgive me? The question caught me unprepared. I'd spent so much energy focusing on accountability and consequences that I hadn't considered what redemption might look like. Ask me again in 5 years, I said. After you've demonstrated that the man who signed these documents today is different from the man who stole my identity last year. And if I can't do it, if the restrictions are too much and I mess up, then you'll learn what prison feels like, and Brianna will learn what financial ruin feels like, and our family will learn what it means to have a son and brother who's a convicted felon. Marcus nodded slowly, accepting the weight of those consequences. I won't mess up. See that you don't. After he left, I remained in the conference room reviewing the signed documents. In the space of 2 hours, I'd acquired legal authority over another adult's financial life, committed myself to decades of oversight responsibility, and fundamentally altered the dynamic between my brother and me. Carmen returned as I was organizing the paperwork. How do you feel? She asked. Like I just sentenced someone to 25 years of supervised financial probation. He sentenced himself when he decided to commit mortgage fraud. You just chose rehabilitation over incarceration. Did I? Or did I choose control over justice? Carmen sat down across from me in the chair Marcus had occupied during the signing. Does it matter? The outcome is the same either way. He faces consequences for his actions, you recover your financial losses, and he gets an opportunity to prove he can change. What if he can't change? What if this arrangement just enables him to continue being irresponsible while I cover the costs? Then you'll have learned something important about your brother's character, and you'll still have the option to pursue criminal charges. That evening, I drove past Marcus and Brianna's house on my way home from the office. The windows glowed warmly in the gathering dusk, and I could see Brianna moving around the kitchen, probably preparing dinner for her husband who'd just signed away his financial independence to avoid federal prison. She had no idea that the life she was living, the house she was cooking in, the security she felt about their future was all dependent on my continued willingness to honor the agreement Marcus had signed that afternoon. Her happiness balanced on my mercy. Her stability rested on my patience. Her trust in her husband's success depended on my silence about his crimes. In assuming responsibility for Marcus's debts, I'd also assumed responsibility for protecting Brianna from the truth about how those debts had been created. It was a burden I hadn't fully anticipated when I'd planned this confrontation. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. Talk to Brianna. Use the disclosure language. She has questions but accepts the business arrangement explanation. Thank you for giving me a way to tell her without destroying our marriage. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Make sure you're as good at keeping this agreement as you were at breaking the law. Brianna's happiness depends on your compliance now. His reply came immediately. I understand. I won't let you down again. Time would tell whether that promise was genuine or just another manipulation from someone who'd spent years telling people what they wanted to hear. But for the first time since discovering his fraud, I felt like justice might actually be served, even if it came wrapped in mercy and tied with conditions. The next chapter of our relationship would be written in monthly budget reports, approved expenses, and careful documentation of every financial decision Marcus made. It would be measured in mortgage payments made on time, restrictions honored without complaint, and gradual rebuilding of trust through consistent behavior. Marcus had stolen my financial identity and used it to build a life he couldn't afford. Now he would live that life under my oversight, with my approval and at my discretion. He'd wanted the benefits of my credit rating and income history. Now he would live with the accountability that came with them. The transformation was complete. The victim had become the supervisor, the criminal had become the debtor, and the sister who'd once helped unconditionally had become the guardian who would help conditionally for the next quarter century. Justice, it turned out, was more complicated than revenge, more demanding than punishment, and more expensive than I'd ever imagined. But it was also more satisfying than simply watching Marcus face criminal charges, because it required him to actively earn his redemption rather than passively serve his sentence. The real test would begin tomorrow. When Marcus woke up in his dream house and realized that every financial decision for the rest of his adult life would require permission from the sister he'd betrayed. When he understood that freedom from prison had come at the cost of freedom from oversight. When he learned that mercy could be more restrictive than justice, and that family loyalty could be more binding than legal contracts. He'd wanted to live like a successful man. Now he would learn what successful men actually did. They honored their obligations, accepted responsibility for their debts, and lived within their means, while slowly earning the trust they'd lost through poor choices. It was going to be a very long 25 years. For both of us. 6 months later, I sat in my office reviewing Marcus's latest monthly financial report when Carmen walked in with 2 cups of coffee and an expression I'd learned to recognize as cautiously optimistic news. Your brother's payment cleared yesterday, she announced, settling into her usual chair. On time, full amount, no issues with the transfer. That makes 6 consecutive months, I replied, though I'd been tracking his compliance obsessively since the agreement took effect. 6 months of 50% income transfers, complete expense reporting, and 0 violations of the spending restrictions. Carmen pulled out her own copy of Marcus's monthly report. I have to admit, I didn't think he'd make it past the 2nd month. Neither had I, if I was being honest. The man who'd spent years avoiding responsibility and finding creative ways around financial obligations had somehow transformed into someone who color-coded his expense receipts and submitted his reports 3 days early every month. There's something else, Carmen continued. David Chen called this morning about the Fairchild Corporation contract. They want to discuss extending our partnership to include their new developments in Seattle. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 months ago, I'd been focused on building my business while unknowingly funding my brother's fraud. Now, while managing his financial rehabilitation, my company had grown by 30% and landed contracts that would establish us as the premier real estate marketing firm in the Pacific Northwest. Success, it seemed, came more easily when you weren't being systematically robbed by family members. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Marcus. Over the past 6 months, these calls had evolved from desperate pleas for spending approval to routine check-ins about household expenses and budget adjustments. Good morning, Marcus. Morning, Natalie. I wanted to get approval for a car repair. The transmission is making noise, and the mechanic estimates it'll cost around $800. The old Marcus would have simply charged the repair to a credit card and hoped I wouldn't notice. The new Marcus called for approval even though $800 was well within his discretionary spending limit. Have you gotten a second opinion on the repair cost? Yes, I took it to 2 different shops. Both estimates were within $50 of each other. And this is necessary for your work commute. Yes, the car is essential for my job at the dealership. Approved. Send me the receipt when the work is completed. Thank you. Also, Brianna wanted me to ask about increasing our entertainment budget for next month.
Her sister is visiting from California, and we'd like to take her to some nicer restaurants. What's the additional amount you're requesting? Maybe $300 above our normal dining allocation. 6 months ago, Marcus would have simply spent the money and dealt with the consequences later. Now he was planning ahead, requesting budget modifications, and accepting that his entertainment options required my approval. Approved for a one-time increase. But Marcus, this is exactly the kind of expense planning we discussed. Special occasions need to be factored into your monthly budget request. You're right, I'll do better with advanced planning next time. After ending the call, I found myself staring out the window at Portland's skyline, contemplating the strange satisfaction that came from Marcus's compliance. He was learning financial discipline, accepting accountability, and slowly rebuilding the trust he destroyed. But he was doing it under my supervision, at my discretion, and according to my rules. How's he adjusting to married life under financial supervision? Carmen asked, better than expected. Brianna seems to have accepted the business arrangement explanation. She thinks I'm a co-investor who requires oversight to protect my interests. And she's never questioned why her husband needs his sister's permission to buy dinner. Marcus has gotten creative with his explanation. He tells her that major purchases require investor approval, that it's a standard business practice for co-owned properties. That must be exhausting, managing the truth every day. I think that's the point. Marcus is learning that deception requires constant energy and attention. It's easier to live honestly than to maintain elaborate lies. The transformation in Marcus's behavior had been gradual but undeniable. In the first month, he'd called almost daily with questions about the spending restrictions, testing boundaries and looking for loopholes. By the third month, he developed systems for tracking his expenses and planning his purchases. Now 6 months in, he operated within the budget constraints, as if they were natural limits rather than imposed restrictions. More importantly, he'd stopped trying to charm his way out of accountability. The brother who'd once deflected responsibility with humor and charisma, now accepted feedback about his financial decisions without argument or excuse. There's something I haven't told you, Carmen said, her tone shifting to something more serious. I ran into Brianna at the farmer's market last weekend. And she asked me about you, about how long you've been friends, about your business, about whether I thought you were happy. That's an interesting question for her to ask. I think she's been observing more than Marcus realizes. She's noticed changes in his behavior, changes in their lifestyle, changes in how he makes decisions. What kind of changes? She said he's become more thoughtful about money, more careful about purchases, more involved in budgeting and planning. She thinks it's because of his business partnership with you. In a way it is. But she also said something that made me think she suspects there's more to the story. She asked if I thought you were the kind of person who would help family members even if they'd made serious mistakes. The comment sent a chill down my spine. If Brianna was beginning to suspect that Marcus had needed help with serious mistakes, she might start asking questions that would lead to uncomfortable revelations. What did you tell her? I told her that you were loyal to the people you loved, but that you also expected them to be worthy of that loyalty. Diplomatic. True, but Natalie, if she's starting to piece things together, Marcus is going to have to decide whether to tell her the truth or risk her discovering it on her own. That afternoon, I drove to Marcus and Brianna's house for the first time since the housewarming party that had revealed his fraud. The invitation had come from Brianna, who'd called to ask if I'd join them for Sunday dinner. The request felt significant, like she wanted to observe our family dynamic firsthand, rather than relying on Marcus's descriptions. The house looked exactly as it had 6 months earlier, with perfectly maintained landscaping and an exterior that spoke of prosperity and success. But now I knew the true cost of that prosperity, measured not just in mortgage payments, but in daily compliance with restrictions that governed every aspect of Marcus's financial life. Brianna answered the door with a warm smile and an embrace that felt genuine, rather than obligatory. Natalie, thank you so much for coming. I've been wanting to do this for months. Thank you for inviting me. The house looks beautiful. Marcus has been working so hard to maintain everything perfectly. He's become obsessed with staying within our household budget and making sure every expense is justified. The comment carried undertones I wasn't sure how to interpret. Was Brianna praising Marcus's newfound fiscal responsibility, or was she questioning why he'd become so rigid about money management? Marcus appeared from the kitchen wearing an apron and looking more relaxed than I'd seen him since before our restaurant confrontation. Natalie, perfect timing. Dinner's almost ready. The three of us settled in their dining room, the same space where guests had celebrated Marcus's apparent success 6 months earlier. Now I sat at the table as someone who knew the true source of that success, and who controlled its continuation. Marcus tells me you've been incredibly supportive of our family, Brianna said, serving wine that I knew had been purchased within their approved entertainment budget. I don't think we could have managed the house purchase without your partnership. Family helps family, I replied, using the same phrase Marcus had once used to justify his fraud. It's more than that though. Marcus says you've helped him become more disciplined about financial planning, more thoughtful about long-term goals. Marcus caught my eye across the table, and I could see him calculating how much truth he could reveal without exposing the criminal behavior that had necessitated our arrangement. Your husband has been very committed to honoring our business agreements, I said carefully. He's changed a lot over the past 6 months, Brianna continued. More responsible, more careful about money, more considerate about decisions that affect our future. How so? Well, he used to be quite impulsive about purchases. He'd come home with expensive surprises, plan elaborate trips without discussing the budget first. Now he talks through everything with me, shows me receipts, explains how each expense fits into our monthly planning. Marcus was staring at his plate, probably realizing that his wife had been paying closer attention to his behavior changes than he'd understood. That sounds like healthy financial communication, I observed. It is, but it's also quite different from how he handled money before we got married. Before your business arrangement began. The statement hung in the air like a question that hadn't been directly asked but clearly demanded an answer. People change when they have more responsibility, Marcus said quickly. Home ownership, marriage, business partnerships, they all require more careful planning. Of course, Brianna agreed. But sometimes I wonder if there's something specific that motivated the change. Something that made financial responsibility feel urgent rather than optional. I could see Marcus struggling with how to respond. The truth would require admitting to criminal behavior that would destroy his marriage, and probably land him in federal prison. But continued deception required increasingly elaborate explanations for why his financial life had become so restricted. Marcus learned some hard lessons about money management in his previous marriage, I said, offering him a lifeline that contained enough truth to be believable. Sometimes people need external accountability to maintain good habits. That makes sense, Brianna replied, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely satisfied with the explanation. The conversation moved to safer topics: my business growth, Brianna's work at the nonprofit, Marcus's performance at the dealership. But I could feel undercurrents of suspicion, questions that Brianna wasn't quite ready to ask directly, but that were clearly troubling her. After dinner, Marcus walked me to my car, while Brianna cleaned up in the kitchen. She knows something's not right, he said, without preamble. What makes you think that? She's been asking questions about my spending habits, about why I need approval for certain purchases, about the specific terms of our business arrangement. What have you told her? That you require oversight, because you're a major investor in the property. That it's standard business practice for co-owned assets. And she believes that. She wants to believe it. But she's smart, Natalie. She's starting to notice inconsistencies in my explanations. Such as, last week she asked why I needed your approval to buy new tires for the car if the vehicle isn't part of our business arrangement. I told her that all major expenses affect our household budget, which affects our ability to make mortgage payments, which affects your investment. That's actually a reasonable explanation. It is, but it's also getting complicated to maintain. Every question requires a more elaborate answer, and I'm running out of believable reasons why my financial life is so restricted. We'd reached my car, but neither of us moved to end the conversation. This was the first time Marcus had admitted that living under the agreement was becoming psychologically difficult, not just financially restrictive. Are you having second thoughts about our arrangement? I asked. No, he said immediately. I'm grateful every day that you didn't have me arrested. I'm grateful that Brianna still has the house she loves, that she still believes I'm a responsible husband who can provide for our family. But maintaining the deception is exhausting. Every conversation about money requires careful thought about what I can say without revealing too much.
Every financial decision involves multiple layers of explanation about why I need permission or approval. Welcome to the cost of fraud, Marcus. This is what happens when you build a life on lies. Even when the lies stop, you still have to live with their consequences. I know. I'm not complaining. I'm struggling with the weight of it all. For the first time since discovering his crimes, I felt genuine sympathy for Marcus's situation. He was learning that redemption was more complicated than simply agreeing to restrictions. It required daily choices to honor commitments, maintain honesty within the bounds of necessary deception, and live with the psychological burden of knowing that his freedom depended entirely on someone else's continued mercy. Marcus, do you want to tell her the truth? Sometimes, when she looks at me with complete trust and admiration, when she talks about how proud she is of the man I've become, I want to tell her that everything she thinks she knows about my success is based on crimes I committed against my own family. But I also know that telling her the truth would destroy everything. She'd lose the house, lose her respect for me, probably lose her marriage to someone she thought was honest and dependable. So you live with the guilt to protect her happiness. I live with the guilt because I earned it. Brianna doesn't deserve to suffer for my choices. That's a surprisingly mature perspective. I've had 6 months to think about it. 6 months of living with the consequences of what I did, 6 months of seeing how my fraud affected not just you but everyone who trusted me. I studied his face in the dim light from the street lamps, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. But Marcus seemed genuinely reflective, genuinely burdened by the weight of maintaining deception, even in service of protecting someone he loved. The agreement we signed gives you 24.5 more years to figure out how to live with these consequences, I said. Are you prepared for that? I have to be. The alternative is prison and the destruction of everything Brianna and I have built together. Even if it's built on fraud, especially because it's built on fraud. If I'm going to live in a house purchased with stolen money, the least I can do is honor the terms that allow me to keep it. 3 months later, Carmen burst into my office with news that changed everything. Marcus got promoted, she announced, waving a printout from the Premier Auto Group website. Senior Sales Manager to Assistant Sales Director. 20% salary increase plus expanded commission opportunities. I stared at the announcement, calculating the implications. Under our agreement, 50% of Marcus's gross income came to me for mortgage payments. A 20% salary increase meant significantly more money flowing into the account I'd established for managing his debt. He hasn't reported the promotion yet, Carmen continued. His next monthly report isn't due for 2 weeks. Maybe he doesn't know the exact salary figures yet. HR departments can take time to process promotion paperwork. Or maybe he's trying to figure out how to hide the increase from you. The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it was worth considering. Marcus had been compliant for 9 months, accepting every restriction and honoring every term of our agreement. But a substantial salary increase might tempt him to test the boundaries of my oversight. My phone rang with Marcus's number, as if our conversation had somehow summoned his call. Natalie, I have news. Good news, I think. Congratulations on your promotion. Silence, then quietly, how did you know? It's my business to know. The question is why you didn't tell me immediately. I wanted to get all the details first. The salary adjustment, the new commission structure, the timing of when everything takes effect. And I wanted to think about how to present it to you. Present it to me how? In a way that shows I'm still committed to our agreement, even though my circumstances have improved. I could hear the careful calculation in his voice. Marcus was learning to navigate the psychology of our relationship, understanding that his financial success might threaten me if I perceived it as a move toward independence. Marcus, your improved circumstances are good news for both of us. Higher income means more money available for mortgage payments and faster progress toward paying down the debt you created. So you're not worried that I'll try to use the promotion to get out from under our agreement. Are you planning to try? No, absolutely not. I've learned too much about the value of accountability to give it up now. Then we don't have a problem. Send me the updated salary information when HR finalizes everything, and we'll adjust the payment calculations accordingly. Thank you for trusting me to report it honestly. Thank you for giving me reason to trust you. After hanging up, I realized that Marcus's promotion represented a milestone in his rehabilitation. 9 months earlier, he would have seen increased income as an opportunity to expand his lifestyle or find ways around financial restrictions. Now he was volunteering information that would result in higher payments to me and requesting guidance on how to maintain our agreement under changed circumstances. The transformation wasn't just behavioral, it was psychological. Marcus had internalized the idea that financial decisions required accountability, that success came with obligations, and that trust was something to be earned through consistent actions rather than claimed through family relationships. 2 years after the agreement was signed, I received a call that I'd been both expecting and dreading. Natalie,
it's Brianna. I need to talk to you about Marcus. My heart rate accelerated. Had she discovered the truth about his fraud? Had Marcus finally confessed to the crimes that had necessitated our arrangement? Of course. What's going on? I think he's having an affair. The accusation was so unexpected that I almost laughed. What makes you think that? Money. There are financial discrepancies I can't explain. Money that seems to disappear from our accounts without corresponding expenses. What kind of discrepancies? Well, Marcus's salary has increased significantly over the past year, but our household budget hasn't changed proportionally. When I ask him about the missing money, he says it's being invested in business partnerships, but he won't give me details. I realized that Brianna had stumbled onto the truth from a completely unexpected angle. She wasn't suspicious about past fraud, she was suspicious about current money transfers that she couldn't explain. Have you asked Marcus directly about these investments? Yes, and he gets evasive. He says it's complicated business stuff that I wouldn't understand, that he's working with you on long-term financial planning. What exactly has he told you about our business relationship? That you're a co-investor in our house, that you require certain financial oversight to protect your interests, that major expenses need approval to ensure we can meet our obligations. And you believed that explanation. For a while. But Natalie, I work for a nonprofit that deals with financial literacy. I understand business partnerships and investment agreements. The level of control you have over Marcus's spending isn't normal for a co-investor. What kind of control do you think I have? I think you review his expenses, approve his purchases, and receive a significant portion of his income. I think our household budget is restricted not because of our mortgage obligations, but because of payments Marcus makes to you. And what do you think those payments are for? I don't know. Maybe he borrowed money from you that he can't repay. Maybe he made mistakes that created financial obligations. Maybe there's something about his past that I don't understand. Brianna was remarkably close to the truth, approaching it from the perspective of someone who'd observed the effects of Marcus's accountability without understanding the criminal behavior that had created the need for it. What do you want from me, Brianna? I want honesty. I want to understand why my husband's financial life is controlled by his sister, why he can't make major purchases without permission, why a significant portion of his income disappears every month. Have you considered that there might be good reasons why Marcus hasn't told you everything? I've considered that. I've also considered that if those reasons exist, I deserve to know what they are. Even if the truth might change how you feel about your marriage. Especially then, I found myself in an impossible position. Telling Brianna the truth would honor her right to know about the financial crimes that had shaped her marriage. But it would also destroy the life Marcus had worked so hard to rebuild and violate the spirit of the agreement that had kept him out of federal prison. Brianna, I think you should have this conversation with Marcus, not with me. I've tried. He deflects, changes the subject, or gives me explanations that don't add up. Then maybe you need to make it clear that deflection isn't acceptable anymore. I'm thinking about hiring a private investigator. The threat was both surprising and terrifying. A professional investigation would uncover Marcus's fraud within days, revealing not just the original crimes but the ongoing arrangement that had kept them hidden. Before you do that, give Marcus one more chance to tell you the truth voluntarily. And if he doesn't, then you'll have learned something important about the man you married. That evening, Marcus called in a state of barely controlled panic. Brianna confronted me again about the money. She knows something's not right, and she's threatening to hire an investigator. What did you tell her? Nothing yet. I asked for time to think about how to explain everything. And what have you decided? I think I have to tell her the truth. About the credit card fraud, the mortgage fraud, the agreement we signed, all of it. Are you prepared for her reaction? No, but I'm not prepared to lose her to an investigation that would reveal everything anyway, probably in the worst possible way. Marcus, if you tell Brianna the truth, you'll need to be prepared for any outcome. She might forgive you, she might leave you, she might insist on dissolving our agreement and facing the legal consequences. I know, but living with deception has become harder than facing the truth. What do you want from me? I want you to be there when I tell her. I want her to hear from both of us how the agreement works, why it was necessary, and why it's actually protected her from worse consequences. You want me to help you confess to crimes I've been covering up for 2 years. I want you to help me save my marriage by finally being completely honest with my wife. The conversation Brianna, Marcus and I had 3 days later was the most difficult of my adult life. Sitting in their living room, surrounded by furniture purchased with stolen money and maintained through systematic deception, I watched my brother confess to crimes that could have sent him to federal prison. Brianna's reaction was everything Marcus had feared, and nothing he'd expected. She didn't scream or cry or threaten to leave. Instead, she asked detailed questions about the timeline of his fraud, the terms of our agreement, and the financial implications of different options going forward. "So the house is actually owned by Natalie," she said after Marcus had explained the mortgage fraud. "Legally, yes. I'm listed as the borrower, but Natalie is financially responsible for the debt, and 50% of your income goes to her every month, to cover the mortgage payments and gradually repay what I stole. Yes, for the next 23 years. Unless the mortgage is paid off early or we renegotiate the terms." Brianna turned to me. "And you could have him arrested at any time." "Yes, though the statute of limitations on some charges may have expired." "Why haven't you?" "Because this arrangement serves justice better than prison would. Marcus faces consequences for his actions. I recover my losses gradually, and innocent people like you don't suffer for crimes they didn't commit. But I have suffered. I've spent 2 years living with a husband who couldn't tell me the truth about the most basic aspects of our financial life." "That's true," I acknowledged. "Marcus's choices affected everyone who trusted him." Brianna was quiet for a long time, processing the magnitude of what she'd learned. When she spoke again, her voice was steady but sad. "I need time to think about this. I need to decide whether I can stay married to someone who committed felonies to impress me, then spent years lying about the consequences." "I understand," Marcus said quietly. "I'll do whatever you need me to do. Right now, I need space. I'm going to stay with my sister for a few days while I figure out what comes next." After Brianna left, Marcus and I sat in the house that had started this entire ordeal, surrounded by the material success that had cost both of us so much more than money. "Do you think she'll stay?" he asked. "I don't know. That depends on whether she can forgive the lies as well as the crimes. And if she can't, then you'll learn what it feels like to lose everything you built through deception." "Will you still honor our agreement if she leaves me?" "The agreement isn't dependent on your marriage, Marcus. It's dependent on your compliance with its terms. So I could lose my wife and still be financially controlled by my sister for the next 23 years. That's the risk you took when you decided to commit fraud instead of living within your means." 6 months later, Brianna moved back home. She'd spent the intervening time in counseling, both individual and couples therapy with Marcus, working through the betrayal and deception that had shaped their marriage from its beginning. "I've decided to stay," she told me over coffee one afternoon. "Not because I've forgiven everything Marcus did, but because I believe he's genuinely changed." "What convinced you?" "Watching how he's honored your agreement for 2.5 years. Seeing that he's capable of accepting accountability and living within restrictions. Understanding that he's learned the difference between earning success and stealing it. And you're comfortable living with our financial arrangement." "I'm comfortable living with the consequences of Marcus's choices, as long as those consequences continue to teach him about responsibility and accountability." "What if he hadn't confessed? What if you'd discovered the truth through an investigation?" "Then I would have left him. The crimes were bad, but the continuing deception would have been unforgivable." "Why?" "Because it would have meant he was still the same person who thought he could build a life on lies. The fact that he finally chose honesty, even when it was terrifying, showed me that he'd actually changed." 5 years after Marcus signed the financial oversight agreement, I received a letter that I hadn't expected for at least another decade. "Dear Natalie," it began, "I am writing to request a modification of our financial arrangement. Not because I want to escape accountability, but because I believe I've demonstrated the kind of consistent responsibility that might warrant increased trust." The letter detailed Marcus's financial behavior over the previous 5 years. Perfect compliance with every term of our agreement. No late payments, no unauthorized purchases, no attempts to circumvent the restrictions we'd established. His income had increased substantially through promotions and performance bonuses, all of which he'd reported immediately and accurately. More importantly, he'd used the structure we'd created to develop genuine financial discipline. His budget planning had become sophisticated and forward-thinking. His expense tracking was meticulous. His understanding of long-term financial planning had evolved from non-existent to impressive. "I'm not asking to end our agreement," the letter continued.
I'm asking to modify it in ways that reflect the trust I hope I've earned while maintaining the accountability that's taught me so much. His specific requests were modest. A reduction in required approvals from $200 to $1,000. Permission to maintain a small discretionary savings account. Authority to make routine household purchases without prior notification. I want to prove that I can handle increased financial freedom responsibly, he concluded. And I want to continue honoring the debt I created while demonstrating that 5 years of accountability has taught me how to be trustworthy. Carmen and I spent 2 weeks reviewing Marcus's financial records, payment history, and compliance documentation before scheduling a meeting to discuss his request. His track record is flawless, Carmen observed. No violations, no attempts to test boundaries, no complaints about the restrictions. More than that, I replied. He's evolved from someone who needed permission for every decision to someone who consistently makes good decisions within the framework we established. So you're considering loosening the restrictions. I'm considering whether continued restrictions serve justice at this point, or whether they've become punishment for its own sake. The meeting with Marcus was held in the same conference room where he'd signed the original agreement. The man sitting across from me bore little resemblance to the desperate, defeated person who'd surrendered his financial autonomy to avoid federal prison. This Marcus was confident but not arrogant, successful but not entitled, appreciative but not groveling. He presented his case for modified restrictions with the same thoroughness and attention to detail that had characterized his compliance with our original agreement. I'm not asking for complete financial independence, he said. I'm asking for the opportunity to demonstrate increased responsibility while maintaining the accountability structure that's taught me so much. Why do you want these modifications? Because I want to prove that the lessons I've learned are permanent, not just responses to external control. I want to show that I can be trusted with greater freedom because I've internalized the values that the restrictions were designed to teach. And if I grant these modifications and you violate the new terms, then I'll have proven that I'm not ready for increased trust, and we can return to the original restrictions. What about the mortgage payments? I want to continue the 50% income transfers until the debt is fully satisfied. That obligation shouldn't change regardless of how we modify the approval requirements. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. But Marcus seemed genuinely committed to honoring his obligations while earning the right to increased autonomy. I'll consider your request, I said finally. But Marcus, any modifications would come with a probationary period. If you demonstrate that you can handle increased freedom responsibly, we can discuss further adjustments. If not, we return to the original terms immediately. I understand. And Natalie, I want you to know that even if you granted me complete financial independence tomorrow, I'd still continue making the mortgage payments until our debt is settled. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. Because I took something that wasn't mine and I need to make it right. And because the structure you created saved my marriage, my freedom, and probably my life. 3 months later, I approved Marcus's request for modified restrictions. The changes were modest but symbolically significant. He gained the authority to make routine purchases without prior approval while maintaining the obligation to report all expenses monthly. He could maintain a small emergency fund while continuing to transfer 50% of his income for mortgage payments. Most importantly, he embraced the new terms as an opportunity to prove himself rather than an escape from accountability. 7 years after discovering Marcus's fraud, I received the final payment that satisfied the mortgage debt he'd created in my name. The house was officially his, free and clear, purchased through 7 years of systematic restitution and demonstrated responsibility. I want to transfer the deed to your name, I told him during our final financial meeting. After 7 years of payments, you've earned clear ownership of the property. Thank you, he said, tears in his eyes, not just for the house, but for believing that I could change. You did the work, Marcus. You chose accountability over excuses, responsibility over entitlement, and honesty over deception. The change was yours to make. What happens to us now? To our relationship. Now we find out whether the man who honored this agreement for 7 years can maintain those same principles without external oversight. And if I can't, then you'll have learned that character is what you do when nobody's watching. But Marcus, I believe you can. You've proven that you understand the difference between earning success and stealing it. I have one more request. What's that? I want to establish a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, something funded through the savings I'll accumulate now that I'm not making mortgage payments to you. Why? Because I want to help people achieve success honestly. I want to support kids who are building their futures the right way, the way I should have from the beginning. Today, Marcus and Brianna live in the house he bought with my stolen identity but earned through 7 years of accountability. Their marriage is stronger for having survived the truth about its foundation. Their financial life is managed with discipline and transparency. That would be impressive even without the history of fraud that necessitated it. The scholarship fund Marcus established has helped 12 students pay for college education they couldn't otherwise afford. Every recipient learns about financial responsibility, ethical decision-making, and the importance of building success on honest foundations. As for me, I learned that justice is more complicated than punishment, that redemption is possible but never guaranteed, and that family loyalty sometimes requires holding people accountable for their choices rather than protecting them from consequences. Marcus stole my financial identity and used it to build a life he couldn't afford. But in forcing him to earn that life through years of accountability, I discovered that my brother was capable of becoming the man he'd always pretended to be. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the most valuable ones. Sometimes losing everything you built through deception is the only way to learn how to build something real. And sometimes when family betrays your trust, the greatest gift you can give them is the opportunity to earn it back. The man who stole my credit became the man who rebuilt his character. The sister who chose supervision over prosecution learned that mercy can be more transformative than punishment. And the family that was nearly destroyed by fraud became stronger through the long, difficult process of earning redemption one payment at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.